In this video, you're going to discover something most people never stop to question, not because they're careless, not because they don't care about their future, but because nobody ever taught them to ask the right question in the first place. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. You went to school, maybe 12 years, maybe more. You learned math, history, science, literature, but did anyone at any point sit you down and actually teach you how money works? Not just save some of what you earn, not just get a good job, but the real mechanics. How debt actually functions, how credit scores are built, what the difference is between an asset and a liability. Think about that for a second. Most people spend over a decade, sometimes closer to two, inside a system that's supposed to prepare them for adult life, and yet they walk out of it not knowing how to file their own taxes, not understanding how interest compounds against them, not knowing what a 401k actually does. Meanwhile, they can probably still recite the quadratic formula or name every state capital. Useful, maybe, but not the thing that determines whether they'll struggle financially or thrive. So here's the real question. Is that an accident, or is it by design? Because once you start asking that question, you start noticing something uncomfortable. The same gaps showing up, generation after generation, in almost exactly the same places. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see everything you were ever taught and everything you were never taught at all. Let's go back to where this actually began. Because the modern school system wasn't built yesterday, and it wasn't built with your financial future in mind. It was designed over 100 years ago during the industrial era, when factories were multiplying across entire countries, and factories needed something very specific. They needed workers, lots of them, reliable ones. Workers who could follow instructions without hesitation, show up at the same time every single day, sit still for long stretches, and complete repetitive tasks without asking too many questions along the way. So schools were built, quite literally, to produce exactly that kind of person. Obedient, disciplined, punctual. That was the goal. Not entrepreneurs, not investors, not people who understood how money actually moves through the world. Just good employees. Think about the structure itself for a moment. Bells that ring on a schedule, just like a factory shift change. Rows of desks, facing forward, just like a factory floor, oriented toward a single point of supervision. Raising your hand for permission to speak, raising your hand for permission to leave the room. None of this is an accident. It mirrors almost exactly the environment those early designers were preparing children to enter. There's a name often given to this era of education reform. Some historians call it the factory model of schooling, and the people who designed it were remarkably honest at the time about their intentions. They weren't hiding it. Early writings from that period describe the goal plainly: efficient, standardized, obedient citizens capable of performing repetitive tasks without complaint. It wasn't framed as something sinister, it was framed as progress, a modern solution for a modern economy at the time. The problem isn't that this happened. The problem is that the intention behind it was never updated for the economy we actually live in now. And here's the part that tends to catch people off guard when they really think about it. That system barely changed. Over 100 years have passed, wars have ended, technology has transformed everything, and yet walk into most classrooms today and you'll still find the same basic structure. Rows of desks, a bell that dictates when thinking starts and stops, memorization rewarded, curiosity often overlooked. Meanwhile, the world outside those classroom walls changed completely. We moved from factories to a digital global economy, from guaranteed pensions to complete personal responsibility for retirement, from one steady job for 40 years to a landscape where careers shift 5, 6, 7 times in a lifetime. But the system meant to prepare people for that world stayed almost exactly the same. Nobody sat down, at any point, and asked the obvious question: what do people actually need to know to succeed today? Because if they had, the answer would have been obvious. How to manage money, how investing actually works, how to build something that belongs to you. Instead of trading your time for someone else's paycheck indefinitely, the system kept doing what it was built to do, producing good employees, people who know how to work hard for someone else's dream. And that, right there, is exactly where this problem begins. So if the system was designed for a different world, why does it still feel so normal to us today? That's the next piece of this puzzle. And it has everything to do with how deeply this idea got passed down. Think about your own path for a moment. Your parents probably told you the same thing their parents told them. Go to school, get good grades, graduate, find a stable job. It became the default script, the thing nobody really questions. Because it's what everyone around you was doing too. And for a long time, that script actually worked reasonably well. There was a time, not that long ago, when a diploma alone could open doors, when a stable job really did mean a stable life, when the math simply added up. But somewhere along the way, that math quietly stopped working the same way. The cost of education climbed dramatically. Student debt became something an entire generation now carries, often for decades, sometimes into their 40s and 50s. The cost of living climbed too: housing, healthcare, groceries, all pulling further and further away from what an average paycheck can comfortably cover. Consider this: a degree that once guaranteed a comfortable middle-class life now often comes with a monthly loan payment that follows someone well into their 30s, sometimes their 40s. Meanwhile, that same degree doesn't come with a single class on how to manage the debt it created, or how to negotiate a salary, or how to invest the very first paycheck that follows graduation. The irony is almost impossible to ignore once you see it clearly. Here's another layer worth considering. Every other major life skill gets some kind of formal instruction. Learning to drive requires lessons and a test before you're allowed on the road alone. Learning a trade requires an apprenticeship, years of guided practice before you're trusted to work unsupervised. Even hobbies often come with structured lessons. A first-time cook takes a class. A first-time swimmer gets in the water with an instructor. But managing money, arguably one of the most consequential skills of adult life, something that affects your housing, your health, your relationships, your ability to retire with dignity, requires nothing: no lessons, no test, no apprenticeship, just trial and error, played out with real consequences, often for the very first time, the moment you receive your very first paycheck. Think about how strange that actually is once you say it out loud. We require more preparation to legally operate a car than we do to manage a lifetime of financial decisions that will shape nearly everything else about how someone lives. And yet, the advice stayed exactly the same. Go to school, get a job, work hard, it'll be fine. Nobody updated the instructions, because nobody was really in charge of updating them. Parents pass down what they were taught, teachers teach the curriculum they were given, and that curriculum was never really about financial literacy in the first place. So generation after generation inherits the same gap, not because anyone is deliberately keeping information from you, but because the system was never built to fill that gap to begin with, and nobody along the way had the tools or the time to fix it. Here's something worth noticing. Financial education isn't complicated because the concepts are hard. Compound interest isn't hard to understand. The difference between good debt and bad debt isn't hard to understand. These are simple ideas, simple enough to explain in a single conversation. So why, after 12, 16, sometimes 20 years of formal education, do so many people reach adulthood without ever having that conversation? That's not a coincidence. That's a gap. A very specific, very consistent gap that keeps repeating itself. Family after family, generation after generation. And once you see it clearly, you start to understand why so many hardworking, intelligent people still find themselves financially stuck, despite doing everything they were told to do. If you ask most people why they never learned about money, they'll usually blame themselves. I should have paid more attention. I should have figured it out sooner. I guess I'm just not good with numbers. And that, right there, is the mistake. Not the lack of knowledge itself, but the belief that it's somehow their fault. Because here's what actually happens. People finish school, step into the real world, and immediately feel behind. They see credit card offers, student loan payments, rent, and no real framework for how to handle any of it. So what do most people do? They avoid it. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because facing something you were never taught to understand feels overwhelming. It feels safer to just not look too closely, pay the minimum, hope for the best, figure it out later, and later has a way of turning into years. Meanwhile, something else is happening quietly in the background. Every year that someone avoids learning how money actually works is a year where confusion compounds. Confusion about credit leads to debt that grows faster than income. Confusion about investing leads to money sitting untouched, losing value to inflation year after year. Confusion about taxes leads to missed opportunities, money left on the table, simply because nobody explained the rules of the game. There's a quieter cost too, one that rarely gets mentioned. The stress of financial confusion doesn't stay contained to spreadsheets and bank statements. It bleeds into everything else: sleep, relationships, the ability to focus at work, the willingness to even open the mail some days. People rarely connect the dots between that background hum of anxiety and the simple fact that they were never taught the basic rules of a game they're required to play every single day of their adult life. And it doesn't stop with just one person, it ripples outward. A parent who feels anxious and confused about money often unintentionally passes that same anxiety onto their children, not through lessons, but through tone, through tension at the dinner table when bills come up, through the silence around the subject entirely. So the gap doesn't just repeat itself through missing education, it repeats itself emotionally too. Fear, avoidance, shame, quietly inherited, the same way the missing knowledge was. There's one more layer to this mistake, worth naming directly. Many people quietly assume that financial struggle is simply a personal failing, a character flaw unique to them, rather than a wildly common experience shaped by an education system that left almost everyone equally unprepared. That assumption is isolating. It makes people less likely to talk about money with friends, with family, with anyone, because admitting confusion feels like admitting personal failure. But the numbers tell a different story. When the vast majority of adults report feeling unprepared to manage their own finances, that's not a coincidence of individual weakness. That's a pattern, a systemic one. And the tragic part is that none of this is really about intelligence. Some of the most financially stuck people are brilliant in their own fields. Doctors, engineers, teachers, skilled professionals who mastered incredibly complex subjects, but financial literacy was never one of the subjects they were taught to master, so they end up making decisions based on guesswork or advice from equally uninformed family members or whatever they happen to see online. Not because they're careless, but because nobody ever handed them a real map. And here's the mistake that keeps this cycle going: believing that not knowing is the same thing as not being capable. Those are two completely different things. Not knowing is a gap that can be closed. Believing you're simply not a numbers person is a story that keeps the gap open indefinitely. The people who eventually break this pattern aren't smarter than everyone else. They just, at some point, stopped blaming themselves and started asking a different question. Not what's wrong with me, but what wasn't I ever taught? And that shift, small as it sounds, changes everything about what happens next. So here it is, the part most people never stop to think about. If schools were designed to produce good employees, who exactly benefits from you staying that way? Not in some dramatic conspiracy movie way, but in a much simpler, more uncomfortable way. An economy needs workers, businesses need employees. Someone has to show up, do the job, keep things running, and an entire population that never learns how to build wealth, that never learns how investing works, that spends their whole life trading hours for a paycheck, is exactly the population that keeps that system functioning smoothly. That's not evil, it's just how the incentives quietly line up. Nobody needs to plan this deliberately. The system simply keeps doing what it was originally built to do. Now here's where it gets interesting. The people who eventually build real financial freedom aren't necessarily smarter. They're not luckier. They didn't attend some secret school the rest of us missed. What they did was step outside the default script, even just slightly. They asked questions the system never encouraged them to ask. Not, how do I get a stable job? But how does money actually work? Not, how do I save what's left over? But how do I make my money work for me instead of only working for money? That shift from passenger to participant is the entire difference. Because here's what almost nobody tells you. Financial education isn't gatekept because it's complicated. It's simply optional, and most people never opt in because nobody ever told them it was something they needed to seek out for themselves. The wealthy, by contrast, often pass this down deliberately. Conversations about money, investing, assets happen at dinner tables, not because those families are smarter, but because they understood something the system never taught the rest of us. There's a term sometimes used for this: financial modeling. Children absorbing money habits simply by watching the adults around them handle money openly, calmly, and with curiosity, instead of fear or avoidance. A child who grows up hearing casual conversations about investing or watching a parent calmly review a budget absorbs something no classroom ever offered. Not the specific numbers, but the comfort, the familiarity, the sense that money is something to be understood, not feared. That comfort compounds just like money does, quietly over years into an enormous advantage that has nothing to do with how much anyone actually earns. That financial education isn't something you wait to receive, it's something you have to go find. And once someone realizes that, really realizes it, everything changes. They stop waiting for permission. They stop waiting for someone to teach them the rules. They start teaching themselves. One book, one conversation, one small decision at a time. Not because the system finally worked in their favor, but because they stopped depending on a system that was never designed to give them an advantage in the first place. Let me tell you about two people. We'll call them Daniel and Marcus. Both grew up in similar neighborhoods. Both went through the exact same public school system. Both graduated. Both landed decent, respectable jobs right around the same age. On paper, their starting points were almost identical. Daniel followed the script exactly as it was handed to him. Work hard, show up every day, wait for raises, trust that things would work out eventually. Whatever was left over at the end of the month, he figured he'd deal with later. Marcus started out exactly the same way, but somewhere around his late 20s, something shifted. He got tired of feeling confused every time money came up, tired of nodding along in conversations about investing without really understanding what anyone was talking about. So he started asking questions, uncomfortable ones, basic ones, the kind of questions that felt almost embarrassing to ask out loud at first. What actually is a stock? How does a retirement account really work? Why do some people's money grow while mine just sits there? He read a few books, watched videos during his lunch breaks, started paying attention to something he'd ignored his entire life. Nothing dramatic, no overnight transformation, just a slow, quiet shift from passenger to participant. Daniel, meanwhile, kept doing what felt safe, what felt normal, what everyone around him was also doing. There's a third person worth mentioning here too, someone named Priya. Priya didn't come from money, and she didn't have Marcus's early curiosity either. For years, she avoided the topic completely. It intimidated her. What changed for her was almost accidental. A coworker mentioned in passing that her retirement account had grown by more than her entire annual raise that year. Priya went home that night, and instead of scrolling past the discomfort like she usually did, she opened her own account for the first time in years. She didn't understand half of what she saw, so she looked it up, then looked up the next thing, then the next. It wasn't fast, it wasn't glamorous, but she kept going. 15 years later, the three of them ended up in very different places. Daniel was still working the same type of job, still living paycheck to paycheck, more or less, still believing that one day things would somehow sort themselves out. Whenever the topic of retirement came up around him, he'd change the subject almost instinctively. Not because he didn't care, but because the conversation itself made him feel a familiar, uncomfortable heaviness he'd rather avoid. Marcus wasn't rich, exactly, but he owned assets that were quietly growing in the background. He understood exactly where his money went and why. He had options, choices, a sense of control that Daniel simply never developed. Priya started later than Marcus, but she'd closed most of the gap, simply by refusing to let one uncomfortable moment turn back into years of avoidance. She often says now that the hardest part was never the math. It was that first small decision to stop looking away. Here's what's important to understand about this story. Neither Marcus nor Priya were handed anything Daniel didn't have access to. They didn't inherit money. They didn't get some special opportunity. They didn't attend a better school. They simply stepped outside the default script and started teaching themselves the things the system never did. That's the entire difference between these paths. Not talent, not luck, not privilege, just a decision to stop waiting for permission and start seeking out the education nobody handed them. So if you recognized a little of Daniel in yourself, here's the good news. The gap the system left behind can absolutely be closed. It just takes a decision and a bit of consistency after that. Let's walk through what that actually looks like, step by step. The first step is the one Marcus took. Get curious, on purpose. Not passively hoping information finds you someday, but actively seeking it out, even 10 minutes a day, reading, watching, or listening to something about how money actually works. It doesn't need to feel like homework, it just needs to become a habit. The second step is learning the handful of concepts that quietly run everything. You don't need a finance degree. You need to understand a small set of ideas, how compound interest works, the real difference between an asset and a liability, how credit scores are built, and how they're damaged. These concepts, once understood, change the way you see almost every financial decision in front of you. The third step is teaching your money to work, instead of only working for money. That usually starts small, a retirement account, an index fund, something simple, low cost, and consistent. The goal isn't to become an expert investor overnight. The goal is to stop leaving every dollar completely idle. The fourth step is breaking the silence around money. One of the quietest things the system did was make money a topic people avoid discussing, even with the people closest to them. Talk about it. Ask questions, even if they feel basic, especially if they feel basic. Every person who seems financially confident today once asked a question that felt embarrassing to ask out loud. The fifth step is starting small, like Priya did, instead of waiting for the right moment to start big. Almost nobody's financial turnaround begins with a dramatic overhaul. It usually begins with one small, slightly uncomfortable action: opening an account you've been avoiding, reading one article you don't fully understand yet, asking one question out loud that you've been embarrassed to ask. The size of the first step matters far less than the fact that you actually took it. The sixth step is giving yourself permission to be a beginner. This one gets overlooked constantly. Adults often feel like they're supposed to already know things, especially things that seem basic. But nobody is born understanding interest rates. Nobody is born knowing what a brokerage account is. Every person who eventually mastered this started exactly where you might be starting: confused, a little embarrassed, Googling terms they felt they should already know. There is no shame in starting late. There is only cost in never starting at all. The seventh step is choosing one reliable source instead of drowning in 100 conflicting opinions. The internet is full of financial advice, much of it contradictory, much of it designed to sell something rather than teach something. Pick a small number of sources you trust. Learn their reasoning, not just their conclusions. Over time, you'll start to recognize good thinking from noise almost instinctively. The eighth step is passing it forward. If you have children or younger people in your life, give them what the system didn't give you: real conversations about money, not lectures, just honesty. Explaining how things actually work in plain language, starting early. That single habit can change the trajectory of an entire family line. Not in one generation necessarily, but eventually. None of these steps require permission. None of them require the system to change first. They simply require you to stop waiting for an education that was never coming and start building it yourself. If this video helped you see your own path a little more clearly, that's exactly why this channel exists. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the conversations still to come. Somewhere right now, a student is sitting in a classroom, learning a formula they'll likely never use again. And somewhere else, an adult is avoiding their bank app because looking at it feels heavier than not knowing. These two moments are more connected than they seem. They're both the quiet result of a system that was never really designed to teach people how to build a life of financial freedom. But here's what matters more than where this started. You're not stuck with what you were given. The system may not have handed you the tools, but it also can't stop you from picking them up yourself. Every person who ever changed their financial future started exactly where you are right now, confused about something, behind on something, wishing someone had explained this years ago. Think about Daniel, Marcus, and Priya one more time. Same school, same starting point, same missing education. The only thing that separated where they ended up was the moment each of them decided whether to keep waiting or to start imperfectly right where they stood. There's no dramatic music playing in that moment, no audience watching, no one keeping score. It's just a person, alone with a decision that looks small from the outside and changes everything on the inside. That's the part the system never prepared anyone for. Not the big cinematic turning points, but these quiet, unremarkable ones, repeated enough times to become a completely different life. That moment is available to you too, right now, today. Not someday, once things settle down. The only real difference between staying stuck and moving forward is the decision to stop waiting for a system to change and start becoming your own education. So the real question isn't whether the system was ever designed for you, it's what you're going to do, now that you know it wasn't. Here at The Bigger Picture, we'll always explore the financial questions that truly matter, not with fear, not with sensational headlines, but with honest conversations, clear explanations, and the bigger picture behind every story.